Good morning, everybody. My name is Anzaya, but I also answer to Dr. Anzaya because everybody says, oh, your wife is Dr. Anzaya, you must also be Dr. So-and-so. So these days, I don't even deny it. I say, yes, my name is Anzaya, you can call me doctor. As soon as Mbida finished her PhD, a friend of mine told me, Anzaya, you must go to Next very quickly. Get a master's in theology so that we can call you reverend. And in that way, you will go above. Okay? I didn't do that. Let's look at the principles of parenting, the foundations of parenting. I would like to liken parenting to a three-legged stool where the child is the one who sits on the stool. Now, if that stool has two legs, you know how tricky it is. And as children, we tried sitting on a stool that was broken and would sit on the edge. It's pretty difficult, and you tumble over, okay? So the child needs these three legs in order to stand or sit or function well. And I'd like to open up with that. The first leg on that stool, which is the most critical leg, is a godly life by the parent. So God is calling, first and foremost, the parent to live out godliness in the minutest details of their lives. That is the first step in parenting. Paul in Philippians 4, verses 9 says, "Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." Paul was talking about discipling the Philippians. And you know what? He said, I am the model. I reflect what God requires of you. And if you do exactly what you see in me, if you do exactly what you've heard from me, and you do what you've seen in me, the God of peace will be with you. Meaning you will experience God. That's what it really means. Now, as a parent, that is your call. That is your task. To live in such a way that you can tell your child, have you seen that in me? Have you heard that from me? Just do it, and the God of peace will be with you. Sometimes it's worrying. If my child did what they see in me and see me do, will God really be with them? And so in parenting, God has given us the responsibility to reflect who He is. That is awesome, and it's also frightening. What does that mean? It means that me, as a parent, I commit to a daily time in the Word with God. However busy, however hard, I commit to a daily time with God. It means that I commit to walking with God, first of all, in my life, okay? Because you can do all the techniques that you're taught, but if there is no life behind the techniques, it will fall. That leg of the stool will not support, okay? So the biggest thing that we're called to is to walk daily with God, okay? What does that mean? It means that if I tell them the driving speed is 80 kph, and they see me driving 100 kph, what will they do? They will do the 100 kph because I am the model. I remember once driving along Karen Road and seeing the car in front of me, and I recognized it. It was Mokolo's car, Dr. Mokolo. You'll hear from him later. And it was his son in the car. And I said, that is Michael. He is keeping the speed limit. Where did he learn that from? He learned that from his dad. So what you see in me do, and the God of peace will be with you. So God was with Michael as he obeyed. Yeah? And so we cannot separate our walk with God and our parenting. So that's the first stool leg that you have. The second leg of the stool is If you're in a marriage relationship, to nurture that relationship. That leg is so critical because the children draw strength from it. I remember our daughter coming home for Christmas, and we said, "Thank you so much for coming back home. Thank you for being with us," and so on. And she said, "You know what? I am glad that I've got a home to come to." What did she mean? She didn't mean a physical house. She meant I've got relationships to come back to. Okay? Children at university don't want to go back home. Why? Because at home there's fighting, there's bickering, there is resentment, there is a hardness of heart, and they do not want to be part of that. It's not refreshing, it's not strengthening for them. And so our biggest thing we need to do is reflect the love of Christ in our relationship with one another by the kind of forgiveness that we have received from Jesus. When we do that, we speak the gospel to our children. This is what forgiveness looks like. And I carry that into life. This is what affection looks like. I carry that into life. And I practice it in my own marriage. We're now talking about the next generation. Okay? And so, it is so important that we work on that. If you work on that, you are imparting so much to the children. And the parenting work becomes easier. The children feel very insecure when that leg of the stool is tampered with. And so pay attention to that. Children feel there's something wrong. My whole world is not holding together. Okay? The third leg of the stool is the choices that we make to create the environment the child lives in. Now, most of you are probably in your 30s and 40s. In your 30s and 40s, that's where you must make life happen. If you don't make it happen now, there's no other chance. That window is closed. What does that mean? It means that you're really trying hard to get that house. We talk about we bought a plot, we fenced a plot, we've now poured 1 lorry of stone, that stuff. It's very consuming stuff, okay? That's when you're working on your career. You've just gotten your job. Now you want to put in the hours in order to make the next promotion. Then you're thinking, if I'm really going to make that promotion and earn that money, what do I need to do? I need to get the professional qualifications. That takes time. That takes studies, okay? Then you're thinking, I need that MBA. I need that advanced degree, okay? It's important at that time, and you can see how it will help you, etc. It's required of you, and everybody around you is doing that. Then there's the desire just to prosper, to invest money, because when you get into a meeting, people are talking about how they're investing. And you go back to your husband and ask him, so what are we doing? And your husband asks, who have you been talking with? Yeah? And so the pressure is on. You're hearing all these things, okay? And so what happens is that we get sucked into that. And you know what can begin happening? The children go down in priority. Because what? We're committed to other things. They get less and less time. They get less and less attention. The thing about it is that the results are not immediate. It takes a long time, okay? At work, if you don't put in the work, don't get those qualifications, the results are immediate. And so what do? You work on the thing that gives you a return immediately. The low-hanging fruit is what you go for. Very, very natural. And when you choose that route, when you put your children at that level of priority, you know what you're doing? You're entering them into a road of no return in their lives. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You have also entered a road of no return because those things begin to guide your life, begin to captivate you. Let's look at a person in the Bible who fell into this. Lot, the cousin of Abraham. They're here with Abraham. They're really prospering. They've got all this livestock, and it's multiplying and multiplying. What happens? The workers begin to fight with each other over grazing, over wells, and so on. And so Abraham, being an old wise man, wanting to guard the relationship with his nephew, says, "Nephew Lot, come around. Let's chat. You and me should not be fighting about these things. Let them not divide us. Let us choose. If you go to the left, I will go to the right." The old man puts out the rules. So remember, this is a livestock economy. And so he's given Lot the first choice. Lot looks around and he sees the desert on this side with the sand dunes and the harsh winds and so on. And then he looks at a valley on the right-hand side and he sees it so well watered. And the Bible says, like the Garden of Eden. And for him, "Uncle, is there a catch in this? This is a no-brainer." Okay? And so what does Lot do? Lot chooses the green. He made a decision that you and me would make. And so he goes. And initially, he's on the fringes. And then he's in the middle. He moves into the city. Now, that was a good business decision for him. And he could say, "It's going to be good for my future wife," because we're not told he's married then. "It's going to be good for my children. I'll be able to send them to the best schools. I can plan for their universities. We can do all the investments," and so on. So, and then, these are the kind of things that, he would tell his friends, etc., etc. "Yeah, that's a good decision. Make it, because it will give you 1, 2, 3, 4. And so he makes that decision. But that decision ended up being a bad decision on many levels. Remember, his heart was right. This man is having a quiet time with God. This man is seeking to really obey God. So his heart was really right. And if you look at Peter, 2 Peter 2:8, it says, this is of Lot, that he was a righteous man. He was living among the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and on a day-to-day basis, he was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds that he saw and heard. So he's in an environment whereby he's truly righteous, and he has a righteous soul. And he feels bad about what he sees, about what he hears. Okay? And so he's okay, but he's in the wrong environment. Let's now look at what losses, what price he paid for putting his family into that environment. One of the things that happens is that as they run away from Sodom and Gomorrah, when God pronounces judgment, and he is one of the righteous people seen there, he loses his wife, who didn't obey, didn't trust God, and looked back. Okay? Then he compromises the future marriages of his children, because they are not in a place anymore that they can have normal marriages, relationships, and so on. Have you ever thought that your pursuit of prosperity or education or whatever it is, the environment in which you set your children in, and so on, can really determine the kind of marriages they're going to have? Is it compromising the kind of marriages they're going to have and relationships? That may not even be a thought that is at the foremost of our minds. What happens to him? He ends up running away, and his daughters run away. Later on in life, he becomes a very lonely person in the hills and in the caves. And he takes on to alcohol. And taking on to alcohol, what happens to him? He is a subject of sexual attacks, okay, or deceptions from his daughters. And these are things that happen when you put yourself in those kinds of environments, okay? And then he has children out of incest. And those children, their generations, become the people who fight against God's people, okay? If Lot could go back in his life, he would have made very different decisions about where and what context to locate his family, to relate, and so on. And so Lot had entered a road of no return. It impacted his wife, it impacted his children, and his grandchildren, and generations to come. Okay? Lot had an opportunity to revisit his decision when he was rescued by Abraham when the other kings had raided Sodom and Gomorrah. And he got him out of captivity and he brought him back. This was the time to go back with Uncle Abraham and begin to live a different life. But it goes back into his context where he had lived. Strange? No, it's not strange. He had become accustomed to living like that. He had a vested interest in where he was. Man, the children are in these good high-cost schools. Oh, we live in this neighborhood. Oh, we can spend money in places like this. Why should we go back to the desert, and watch the animals and so on, okay? And his children would tell him, Dad, we want to stay here. Wife would say, Mom, this is great, yeah? Okay? So the family was invested in that lifestyle. It had become accustomed to that. And so he was very deep in it. It was very difficult to disengage. What are we getting to? How many hours in a week are you spending working? Are you spending 60 hours? You're entering a road of no return. That 60 hours is impacting your marriage. Okay? Honey, come home, Why are you late? And so on. Don't carry work home, etc. You're impacting your own spiritual life. It's not possible when you've worked so many hours and you're home so late to wake up in the morning and decide, I am going to have a time with the Lord. You must back up in the evening, sleep early in order to meet your Maker in the morning, okay? To refresh and connect and align with Him. And so it impacts your spiritual life. When you've got that kind of spiritual life that is now more like a desert, it's hard to give others, hard to give to your children, hard to do a ministry. Okay? It even impacts your own health because you cannot sustain that for a long time. Okay? So we just need, and then your children become very low priority when you're doing that. In fact, they become a nuisance. You get irritable, and you pour out your frustrations at work on the children around you. They become a bother, okay? Now, that's not a very hard place to get to, and I'll give you our own example. When I was 42, and Bidha was 49, Synthesis had just really been working on projects, and now we got our break into corporate work. We were now managing bank refurbishments and so on for different banks. It was a time to work. We had looked for this break. And I put in the hours. I put in Saturdays. I could even go to sites, in the evenings and so on. At night, I would come back late. We've had these long meetings in the evening. And then I would come and my brother-in-law told me, I started sleeping on the dining table. I mean, it was that difficult. It was that intense. And so it was the time to prosper. We had the break we were looking for. And I had every good reason to continue that pace. And it was great, and it was exciting. And we were walking up there, and we were meeting all the people that we would want to meet, that we see in the newspapers. This thing becomes addictive, after a while, okay? My wife looked at me and she said, I don't have a husband in you, okay? And it was like my work was priority. I had begun entering that road. And then for her, it's like, I'm 39, I've put 12 years into my children and so on. I now need to do my PhD. When I married Mbide, the PhD was one of those things that I knew was going to happen. Because in her home, if you didn't have those qualifications, you were not really, you couldn't talk, okay? So that one I had settled even before that. And so Mbithe gets into this PhD program that's meant to happen here, and it did happen here, but because of a lack of understanding between the university abroad and the university here, the PhD program breaks down and she has to go and study outside. And we agree on that. Well, reluctantly for me, okay? And so she goes. Do you see how we're slowly now pursuing parallel tracks of success? And we're really going at it. We're now around 40 there and going forward. What happens to the children? What was the effect on the children? For the first one is that, our youngest one looked at me whilst Mom was away and asked me, Dad, are you and Mom going to separate? She was beginning to carry burdens that were not hers to carry. Our eldest daughter, 13 years of age, looked at me and said, Dad, now that Mom is away, are you going to start going out with other women? Okay? She was beginning to think about her mom. She was carrying this burden, okay? And worried, for her mom, worried for me. Our son began getting into fights in school and so on. There was just something about them connecting, with Mom, etc. Mbithe was away 15 months with breaks in there. But it had an impact on our youngest daughter, who was then 6 years old. And she had been with her 6 years old. Our youngest daughter did not reconnect emotionally with her for 12 years until she was 18 years old. That's when she really reconnected with Mbithe again. And it's like, I asked her, so, don't you understand that Mom needed to do this and so on and so forth? Yes, I understand it mentally, but I need to work through this emotionally. I'll come around to it at some point. And she would get at Mbithe. She would really just do things that would make Mbithe feel hurt, okay? But Mbithe stayed in there, with her. At the age of 18, she apologized for the way that she'd been behaving. It took 12 years to deal with a separation of 15 months. Okay? So it makes an impact. Now, supposing I had gone on working those long hours, supposing Mbithe had gone away for 3 years, come back and been involved in an intense job, okay? And supposing those children were left to their own devices, do you know what happens? You begin having a dysfunctional family. Nobody says, hey, they sit down in their plans and say, hey, let's have a dysfunctional family. This is what it looks like. No. A dysfunctional family actually comes out of the pursuit of those things and bringing down priority on the most important things. That's how a dysfunctional family begins to happen. And what happens? The marriage becomes a shell. The biggest sufferers are the children. And because they're not given the attention, because they're not developed, what they begin to do is enter roads of no return in the areas of, and we'll talk about this some more, self-control, developing their potential, relationships with the opposite sex, their own spiritual lives, and handling financial matters. Their ability in those areas begin to be compromised when they're in that kind of dysfunctional setting and parents are not around to give them attention. You are at that very stage in your lives. The amazing thing is that parenting happens when all these other things need to happen as well. Those windows seem to be the same. You've got to make choices of faith in there and choose what's important and allow God to come through for you on the things that you set aside for a while. And not everything can be pursued at the same time with the same vigor. You don't want to get into the 50s and look back, look at the shipwreck of the family. All you can do is say, it's over. You do not want to get there. We're currently doing a study called Tamati with people 50 and above, and it was designed to review the past 50, 55 years that you've lived. At a certain point in life, you can draw a line. And at 55, you can look back and say, well, the children are done, the children are educated. The house is bought, there's some money saved for retirement, whatever it is. Okay, yes, there is also a marriage there. Let's see what state it is in. So at 55, you can draw a line. And so people begin to reevaluate their lives going forward and reposition themselves. And this study has brought out very, very interesting things and has brought out many regrets as well about the past. And I want to share a few of those lessons so that you can go forward and then look backwards and say, what is it that we need to do now? I think marriage was a tough one at that point, and people reevaluating their marriages hadn't given time to them. And now this is what we have. We have to work with it. We can improve it. A painful one was children. Because children, that window had closed, and they couldn't go back. And parents were required to write letters to their children and say, how did you parent us? If you had to do it again, how would you do it? Okay? And we were good, Christian people, and many of the points were very, very affirming. And parents felt like, yes, we put in the work, and we got some good results. And children feel, they feel appreciative of what we did. But that was not the full story. The full story, and you see it all around, is that at that point in time, when you send your children away and they're at the university and they're on their own and they're independent, now is the test. And they look back at the children and it's like, the children are having alcohol addictions. The children are into drugs. The children are addicted to leisure. And there's a newfound freedom they have in their lives that is actually financed by you as a parent. The money that you give them for school and so on finds its way into other things. And so you look at it, that's what we're getting after all these years. You wonder, what happened to the values that I worked so hard to give to them? And the question is, why aren't they like us? Why aren't they like us? We worked hard, we stayed, on the narrow, we didn't get into addictions, and so on. And then the question comes, in the early years of parenting, and even in the teen years, and we talked about this busy time, was I there to make sure there was self-control, that self-control was taught to the children? Self-control seems to guide a lot of things. So in self-control, was I there to make sure that there was delayed gratification? So that the child doesn't feel like the feeling I have needs to be satisfied and needs to be satisfied now. Was I there for that? Or when I put maize and beans and vegetables there and they asked for chips and yogurt and so on, it came out. What was I doing? I was indulging them and I was gratifying them. So was I there to do that? And if you're not there, then they will find ways to gratify themselves. So, did they eat what you want them to eat or not? Okay. Was I there to make sure that they sleep on time and demand that they sleep on time? Again, those are boundaries that have got to do with self-control. If I'm not there, and those things don't get done, project that to the time that I am 55, looking back at these indulgences that are now life-threatening. Okay? At one point it was, do I let them go for this yogurt? But that gratification now became gratification for alcohol and drugs. It's the same thing at a different level at a different time. Were they watching TV all the time? Or was I there to set the boundaries for them? Or were they even being babysat and being kept busy by television? Just gratifying themselves, just appealing to their senses and their feelings and so on. Okay? Was I there to make sure that my will is what carried the day? Right now, we're talking about I go to work, I sweat it out, I come home, and you know what? There is more work. In fact, it is work after work. Sorry, that's what goes with the 30s and 40s, and God gives you the grace to do it. But it is work after work. There is no time to kick back. Okay? That time will come, and you want to kick back at that time when you know you've given it your best, and you've got a clear conscience about that. But for the next 20 years, stay with it. Okay? Because after that, you will have like what? Another 40 years. It makes sense to give it the time now. Okay? So, are you there to make sure that what you want done is done? When you want it done, it is done when you want it done. Okay? Where you want it done. You don't eat your food on the floor, you eat your food on the table. That's where I want food eaten. Are you there to make sure that that happens? Are you there to make sure that it is done the way you want it done? Or is the child making decisions as to, this is what I want to do, this is when I want to do it, this is where I want to do it, this is how I want to do it? Are those decisions left to the child? Because they will carry on into the years ahead, and the world does not accommodate that, and it's not good for them. Okay? The purpose of self-control right now is to make sure that the child is doing your will, that the child is doing the will of the parent. That is God's expectation of you, not their will. It doesn't count at this point in time, okay? There is no democracy in this house and so on. I'm an autocrat, and my will gets done, okay? Because it's good for you. So are they doing the will of the parent? When they learn how to do the will of the parent, then they can do the will of God, and they can do what's right for them. That is what is at stake here. And so you may say, oh, I'm not that kind of guy who imposes my will on people. No, God expects it of you. For a very good reason. If they learn to do your will, they learn to do the will of somebody else, and that is God. Paul puts this very well as a goal in mind that we have. He says, like an athlete, I punish my body, treating it roughly, training it to do what it should, not what it wants. Okay? So, and this very strong language here, can I punish the body of my child? Yeah? And you can punish the body of your child. The boundaries, okay, are that punishment. Can you train the child to do what they should? That's a job that you need to do, okay? And not what it wants, okay? So that is our job. And it may seem hard on the child, and it will seem hard on you, but that's your calling. And so that they are self-controlled, and their lives are much more fulfilling in the years to come. So that is self-control and how it manifests in the years later. Let's look at another area that, you review people in the 50s, and, we looked at it, is one of children not living to their potential, okay? And it's like they've got everything. The firewood is there, the papers are there, maybe some paraffin, the matchbox is there, but, somehow everything is in place, but it produces smoke. It can never be set right to produce that fire that you're looking for, that fire that is capable. of being produced. And you look at the child, and maybe they're entering now from 5, 6, or from 4, and they don't know what they want to do, and they don't know what grades they want to get, and you can't push them because you can't push a child to study, in order to make those grades. And when you talk to them, it's like, so why does this bother you? They look at you and wonder, what's wrong with you? Why can't I just live my life, the way I want to live it? You can't even come to terms with that it doesn't even bother them. Yeah?